The gavel struck the bench for the last time in Judge Harrison Blake's courtroom on November 8, 2023. 3 hours later, his colleague Judge Robert Hyde would be found dead in his home office, a single gunshot wound to the chest. The murder. Weapon belonged to Blake, but the motive ran deeper than professional rivalry or legal disputes. Blake had been obsessed with Hyde's wife, Elena, for 2 years, and his carefully planned scheme to eliminate his rival had just begun to unravel. Security cameras at the courthouse captured Blake leaving through the parking garage at 5:47 p.m., carrying a briefcase that would later be found to contain latex gloves, a burner phone, and detailed surveillance photos of the Hyde family. His judicial robes hung in his chambers, but he would never wear them again. The respected jurist who had sentenced hundreds of criminals was about to become one himself. Elena. Hyde discovered her husband's body at 8:23 p.m. when she returned from her book club meeting. The scene appeared to be a botched robbery, with desk, drawers pulled open, and papers scattered across the floor. But investigators would soon discover that nothing had been stolen. The staged crime scene was Blake's attempt to cover up a murder born from his twisted desire to possess another man's wife. Blake's plan involved more than just killing Robert Hyde. Hidden files on his home computer revealed a comprehensive strategy to comfort the grieving widow, gradually insert himself into her life, and eventually marry her. He had researched grief counseling techniques, studied Elena's interests and hobbies, and even planned the timing of his romantic approach down to the week. The investigation would expose not just a murder, but a web of judicial corruption, evidence, tampering, and abuse of power that reached the highest levels of the county court system. Judge Harrison Blake's obsession had transformed him from a guardian of justice into its ultimate betrayer. The Riverside County Courthouse stood as a monument to justice in downtown Riverside, California, its marble columns and bronze doors symbolizing the law's authority. The building housed 12 courtrooms where judges presided over everything from traffic violations to capital murder cases. Judge Harrison Blake occupied courtroom 7 on the 3rd floor, where he had served for 8 years with a reputation for fairness and strict adherence to legal procedure. Blake, 51, lived alone in a Spanish-style home in the affluent Magnolia Heights neighborhood. Divorced 3 years earlier, he had no children and few close relationships outside his professional circle. Colleagues described him as intelligent but reserved, someone who preferred the company of law books to social gatherings. His former wife had cited his controlling behavior and emotional distance as reasons for their divorce. Judge Robert Hyde, 45, worked in courtroom 4, specializing in family law and custody disputes. He had served on the bench for 6 years after a successful career as a family attorney. Hyde lived with his wife Elena and their 12-year-old daughter, Sophia, in a suburban neighborhood 15 minutes from the courthouse. Alana Hyde, 39, worked as a librarian at the county library system and volunteered with several charitable organizations. She had married Robert 12 years earlier, and their relationship appeared stable and happy to friends and colleagues. Elena's beauty and warm personality made her popular in their social circle, though she remained devoted to her family and showed no interest in outside romantic attention. The two judges maintained a professional relationship, serving together on courthouse committees and occasionally collaborating on administrative matters. Their families had attended the same social events, and Blake had been a guest at the Hyde home for dinner parties and holiday celebrations, giving him intimate knowledge of their daily routines and personal habits. Judge Robert Hyde completed his final case of the day at 4:30 p.m. on November 8, 2023, signing custody modification papers in a contentious divorce proceeding. Court staff observed him gathering his files and preparing to leave for the day, following his normal routine of reviewing the next day's docket before departing. Security cameras recorded Hyde Exiting the courthouse through the main entrance at 5:15 p.m., Hyde drove directly home to his house on Elm Street, arriving at 5:32 p.m., according to his garage door opener's electronic log. His wife Elena had left for her weekly book club meeting at 5:45 p.m., kissing her husband goodbye as he sat in his home office reviewing case files. Their daughter Sophia was spending the night at her grandmother's house, leaving Robert alone for the evening. Blake's cell phone GPS data would later show he had been parked 3 blocks from the Hyde home at 6:15 p.m., watching the house through binoculars he kept in his car. He had studied the family's schedule for months and knew Elena would be away until approximately 8:30 p.m. Sophia's absence provided additional time without the risk of witnesses. At 6:47 p.m., Blake approached the Hyde home through the backyard, using a key he had secretly copied during a dinner party 6 months earlier. He entered through the kitchen door and made his way to Robert's home office, where the judge was working on legal briefs with his back to the door. Blake wore latex gloves and carried a .38 caliber revolver registered under his name. The confrontation lasted less than 2 minutes. Robert Hyde turned around when he heard footsteps and recognized Blake immediately. Physical evidence at the scene suggested a brief struggle, with Hyde attempting to reach for his desk phone before Blake fired a single shot into his chest at close range. Hyde collapsed behind his desk and died within minutes from massive internal bleeding. Blake immediately began staging the crime scene to resemble a burglary. He pulled out desk drawers, scattered papers across the floor, and overturned the lamp to create the appearance of a struggle with an intruder. However, his efforts were superficial and would later be easily identified as staging by forensic investigators. Blake's legal knowledge did not extend to crime scene manipulation. The killer spent 18 minutes in the house, using the time to search for personal items belonging to Elena, including photographs and pieces of jewelry he intended to keep as trophies. He also planted false evidence, including pry marks on a window and muddy footprints leading from the backyard, to support the burglary theory. Blake left the Hyde home at 7:05 p.m. through the same kitchen door he had used to enter. Neighborhood security cameras captured his vehicle driving away from the area, though the license plate was obscured by mud he had applied before the killing. He drove to a remote location outside the city limits and disposed of the murder weapon in a creek, believing it would never be recovered. Elena Hyde returned from her book club at 8:23 p.m. and discovered her husband's body in his office. She immediately called 911, reporting what she believed was a burglary gone wrong. Riverside police arrived at 8:31 p.m. and found Elena in a state of shock. Being comforted by neighbors who had responded to her screams, the first responding officers secured the crime scene and called for homicide detectives. Detective Lisa Brooke arrived at 9:15 p.m. and immediately noticed inconsistencies in the staged burglary scene. The pry marks on the window showed no corresponding damage to the window frame, and the scattered papers appeared to have been deliberately placed rather than knocked over during a struggle. Hyde's body position and the blood spatter patterns indicated he had been shot while seated at his desk, contradicting the appearance of a struggle with a burglar. The lack of defensive wounds and the close-range nature of the gunshot suggested Hyde had known his killer and had not perceived an immediate threat. Detective Lisa Brooke began her investigation by interviewing Elena Hyde and close family members to establish Robert's daily routine and identify potential enemies or threats. Elena described her husband as well-liked and professional, with no known conflicts that would justify violence. She mentioned that Blake had been especially supportive since Robert's death, calling frequently to offer assistance and comfort. The detective's examination of the crime scene revealed multiple inconsistencies with the burglary theory. No valuables had been taken from the house, including expensive electronics, jewelry, and cash that were visible and easily accessible. The staged elements of the scene appeared clumsy and obvious to trained investigators, suggesting the killer lacked experience in crime scene manipulation. Brooke discovered that the Hyde home security system had been disabled from the inside 30 minutes before the estimated time of death. The system could only be deactivated using the family's personal code, indicating Robert had known and trusted his killer enough to let them into the house. Elena confirmed that only she, Robert, and Sophia knew the security code. The investigation revealed that Blake had been conducting surveillance of the Hyde family for months before the murder. His credit card records showed purchases of binoculars, a telephoto camera lens, and GPS tracking devices that he had secretly placed on Elena's car. Bank records indicated he had withdrawn large amounts of cash, likely to fund untraceable purchases related to his stalking activities. Detective Brooke found evidence that Blake had been researching Elena's personal interests and activities through social media monitoring and public records searches. His home computer contained hundreds of screenshots from Elena's Facebook and Instagram accounts, along with detailed notes about her daily schedule, favorite restaurants, and social connections. Phone records revealed that Blake had been making frequent calls to the Hyde home in the weeks before the murder, ostensibly for work-related matters. However, the timing of these calls corresponded with periods when Robert was known to be in court, allowing Blake to speak privately with Elena and gather information about her activities. The detective discovered that Blake had used his judicial connections to access confidential information about Robert Hyde, including financial records, personal addresses, and family background data. He had exploited his position to obtain details that facilitated his surveillance and planning activities, representing a serious breach of judicial ethics. Forensic analysis of Blake's vehicle revealed trace evidence linking him to the Hyde home. Soil samples from his car tires matched the unique mineral composition of the Hyde backyard, and pollen found in his wheel wells came from plants that grew only in the Hyde garden. The evidence placed Blake's car at the crime scene, despite his attempts to establish an alibi. Brooke learned that Blake had been visiting Elena Hyde regularly since Robert's death, bringing flowers, offering legal assistance, and volunteering to help with household repairs. Neighbors reported seeing his car in the Hyde driveway multiple times per week, unusual behavior for a colleague offering condolences. Elena had begun to feel uncomfortable with Blake's persistent attention. The investigation uncovered Blake's detailed plans for pursuing Elena after an appropriate mourning period. His personal journal contained timeline entries marking when he intended to ask Elena for dates, introduce romantic elements into their relationship, and eventually propose marriage. The entries revealed his belief that Elena would naturally turn to him for comfort and support. Detective Brooke found evidence that Blake had been sabotaging other men who showed interest in Elena, including spreading false rumors about a neighbor who had offered to help with yard work and filing anonymous complaints against a coworker who had asked Elena for coffee. His efforts to eliminate potential romantic rivals demonstrated the obsessive nature of his behavior. The detective's analysis of courthouse security footage revealed that Blake had been following Elena on multiple occasions, including tracking her to the grocery store, her daughter's school, and social events. His surveillance activities had escalated in the months before Robert's murder, indicating a growing obsession that was spiraling out of control. The investigation took a stunning turn when Detective Brooke discovered that Blake's obsession with Elena Hyde was not his first offense. A review of his judicial decisions revealed a pattern of unusually lenient sentences for defendants who had committed crimes against women, particularly domestic violence and stalking cases. Court records showed Blake had consistently undermined prosecutors' recommendations for protective orders and jail time. Further investigation revealed that Blake had been using his judicial position to gather personal information about attractive women who appeared in his courtroom. His computer contained files on dozens of female defendants, witnesses, and attorneys, including home addresses, phone numbers, and personal photographs obtained through court records and surveillance activities. The most shocking discovery came when Brooke found evidence that Robert Hyde had discovered Blake's obsessive behavior and was planning to report him to judicial authorities. Hyde's personal files contained photographs of Blake following Elena, documentation of his inappropriate phone calls, and a draft letter to the State Judicial Commission detailing Blake's misconduct. Detective Brooke learned that Hyde had confronted Blake about his behavior 3 days before the murder, demanding that he stop contacting Elena and threatening to expose his activities if the harassment continued. The confrontation had taken place in Blake's chambers after court hours, witnessed only by a security guard who confirmed seeing Hyde leaving Blake's office in an agitated state. The investigation uncovered evidence that Blake had been planning to frame Elena for her husband's murder if his burglary scenario failed to convince investigators. His home computer contained research on spousal murder statistics, insurance fraud schemes, and methods for planting evidence to implicate Elena in Robert's death. Blake's backup plan involved painting Elena as a woman who killed her husband for insurance money. Brooke discovered that Blake had secretly recorded conversations with Elena during his visits to her home following Robert's death. The recordings, stored on encrypted devices, captured Elena expressing grief and vulnerability that Blake apparently found sexually arousing. The recordings also contained Elena's unknowing admissions about her daily routines and security concerns. The most disturbing revelation came when investigators found Blake's detailed fantasy journal describing his plans for Elena after Robert's death. The entries described not just romantic pursuit, but elaborate scenarios involving kidnapping, imprisonment, and sexual assault. Blake had researched soundproofing materials and restraint devices, suggesting his obsession extended far beyond simple romantic desire. Detective Brooke learned that Blake had been doctoring court records to benefit defendants who provided him with information about Elena or other women he was targeting. He had reduced sentences, dismissed charges, and sealed records in exchange for surveillance, assistance from criminals with stalking and harassment experience. The investigation revealed that Blake had used county resources to conduct background checks on Elena's friends, family members, and coworkers, looking for information he could use to manipulate or control her social relationships. He had accessed confidential databases illegally and shared sensitive information with unauthorized individuals. The most shocking discovery came when Brooke found evidence that Blake had been planning additional murders. His computer contained detailed files on 3 other county employees whose wives had attracted his attention. The files included surveillance photos, daily schedules, and draft plans for eliminating the husbands and pursuing the widows. FBI agents joined the investigation when the scope of Blake's criminal activities became apparent. Federal authorities discovered that Blake had been corresponding with other individuals across state lines who shared his obsessive interests in stalking and harassing women. The communications included exchanging surveillance techniques and discussing methods for avoiding detection by law enforcement. The investigation revealed that Blake's judicial corruption extended beyond his personal obsessions. He had been accepting bribes from defense attorneys in exchange for favorable rulings, manipulating evidence in high-profile cases, and using his position to intimidate witnesses and victims who might expose his misconduct. The Riverside County District Attorney's Office filed murder charges against Judge Harrison Blake on December 15, 2023, exactly 5 weeks after Robert Hyde's death. District Attorney Patricia Williams announced that the state would seek the death penalty, citing the premeditated nature of the crime and Blake's abuse of his judicial position. Blake was arrested at his home by a joint task force of local police and FBI agents. He attempted to destroy evidence during the arrest, throwing his computer hard drives into his swimming pool and trying to burn documents in his fireplace. The destruction of evidence resulted in additional charges of obstruction of justice and tampering with physical evidence. The case attracted national media attention due to Blake's judicial position and the shocking nature of his crimes. Legal experts debated whether Blake could receive a fair trial in Riverside County, given his prominence in the local legal community and the extensive publicity surrounding his arrest and criminal activities. Blake hired prominent criminal defense attorney Michael Stevens, who had successfully defended several high-profile murder cases. Stevens' initial strategy focused on challenging the admissibility of evidence obtained from Blake's computers and arguing that his client's constitutional rights had been violated during the investigation. The prosecution's case relied heavily on physical evidence linking Blake to the crime scene, including the forensic analysis of soil and pollen samples from his vehicle. DNA evidence found at the Hyde home matched Blake's genetic profile, and ballistics testing confirmed that the murder weapon belonged to him. Elena Hyde testified for 3 days about Blake's increasingly disturbing behavior following her husband's death. Her testimony included details about unwanted visits, inappropriate comments, and gifts that made her uncomfortable. She described feeling stalked and harassed by someone she had initially trusted as a family friend. Expert witnesses testified about Blake's pattern of judicial corruption and abuse of power. Former defendants and attorneys described cases where Blake had made unusual rulings that benefited individuals who provided him with personal information or surveillance assistance. The testimony established a clear pattern of criminal behavior, extending over several years. The defense strategy focused on Blake's mental state, arguing that he suffered from psychological disorders that impaired his judgment and decision-making abilities. Defense psychiatrists testified about obsessive-compulsive disorder and delusional thinking patterns, claiming Blake was not capable of forming the intent necessary for first-degree murder. Prosecution witnesses included FBI agents who testified about the scope of Blake's surveillance activities and his communications with other stalkers and criminals. The federal investigation had uncovered evidence of Blake's involvement in multiple criminal conspiracies and his use of interstate commerce to facilitate his illegal activities. The trial's most dramatic moment came when prosecutors played recordings Blake had secretly made of Elena Hyde during his visits to her home. The recordings captured Blake making inappropriate comments and Elena's clear discomfort with his behavior. The jury heard Elena unknowingly providing information that Blake used to continue his harassment. After 6 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for 4 days before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Blake was convicted of first-degree murder, stalking, judicial corruption, obstruction of justice, and multiple federal charges related to his abuse of power and interstate criminal activities. Judge Patricia Anderson sentenced Blake to life in prison without possibility of parole for the murder conviction, plus additional consecutive sentences totaling 75 years for the other charges. The sentence ensured Blake would never be eligible for release and would die in federal custody. The Blake case exposed fundamental weaknesses in judicial oversight systems and the potential for trusted authority figures to exploit their positions for criminal purposes. The investigation revealed that Blake had been committing crimes for years while maintaining his reputation as a fair and ethical judge, demonstrating how power and position can provide cover for even the most serious criminal activities. Judge Harrison Blake was transferred to a DX Florence, the federal supermax prison in Colorado, where he serves his sentence in solitary confinement. His law license was revoked, and all of his judicial decisions are being reviewed for potential misconduct and reversible errors that could affect hundreds of criminal cases. Elena Hyde and her daughter Sophia relocated to another state to escape the publicity and trauma associated with the case. Elena required extensive counseling to recover from the stalking and harassment she endured, and she has become an advocate for victims of judicial misconduct and abuse of power. The Riverside County court system implemented comprehensive reforms. Following Blake's conviction, including mandatory psychological evaluations for judges, enhanced oversight of judicial computer usage, and new protocols for reporting suspicious behavior among court personnel. The reforms were designed to prevent similar abuses of power in the future. Multiple civil lawsuits were filed against Riverside County by defendants who had been affected by Blake's corrupt judicial decisions. The county agreed to settlements totaling over $10 million and established a fund to compensate victims of Blake's abuse of power and criminal activities. The case prompted legislative changes in California requiring enhanced background checks for judicial candidates and mandatory reporting of judicial misconduct by court personnel. New laws also established independent oversight bodies with the authority to investigate and prosecute judges who abuse their positions. Federal authorities launched a nationwide investigation into judicial corruption and abuse of power, using Blake's case as a model for identifying similar patterns of criminal behavior among sitting judges. The investigation led to additional arrests and prosecutions in several other states. The Blake case serves as a stark reminder that no position is immune from corruption, and that even those entrusted with dispensing justice can become criminals themselves. Elena Hyde's courage in coming forward about Blake's harassment played a crucial role in exposing his crimes and preventing additional victims. The investigation revealed Blake's criminal activities extended far beyond a single murder, encompassing years of stalking, harassment, corruption, and abuse of power. His case demonstrates the importance of robust oversight systems and the need for constant vigilance in protecting the integrity of the judicial system. Questions remain about how many other cases may have been affected by Blake's corruption, and whether adequate safeguards exist to prevent similar abuses in other jurisdictions. The case continues to influence discussions about judicial accountability and the need for transparency in court systems across the country.